Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Well, hello, everybody. I don't know if the whole upper Midwest had the unbelievable dust storm we had yesterday, but it was wild. And then, we had these tornadoes and across the Midwest. Lots of people were killed. It was really awful. And I don't know. It doesn't seem like the time to get rid of the National Weather Service, but that's where we're headed. Let's talk a little bit about the path ahead to start this show. Look, the old Republican Party is dead. Dead. That's not news. It's been dying for decades. Ronald Reagan killed off the party of Lincoln, the party of civil rights, the party that gave us the EPA, for gosh sakes. W changed it further, throwing aside global restraint and fiscal responsibility. Then Trump sort of completed the transformation by severing all connection to the political norms of a democratic republic in favor of the autocratic norms that characterize European strongmen, and by casting aside, fealty to the social norms of an increasingly diverse society in favor of an enforced Christian nationalist identity. That's what the Republicans are now. But what of the Democrats? What about our side? Bill Clinton famously declared the era of big government is over. That wasn't quite accurate. Democrats stayed close to the post-war consensus, certainly on America's place in the world, its commitment to free trade, and to domestic agenda that, tried to focus on ordinary, hardworking Americans, even if it didn't succeed there. Barack Obama's presidency confirmed part of the promise of a generations-long battle for civil rights, and then expanded the government's commitment to health care. And Joe Biden, in some ways, was closer to FDR than, anybody since FDR. His commitment to unions, to expanding domestic programs, to building alliances internationally, and to defending a European democracy facing an unprovoked assault by a powerful tyrant, all of that felt very American, but, not very new. The old Republican Party is dead. The old Democratic Party is hanging on. And I think that's a problem. I'm going to get myself in trouble today, but I think it's a problem. Because, that party, that Democratic Party, couldn't beat the worst presidential candidate ever. America chose a felon, a sex offender, a liar, and a tyrant over what's left of the Democratic Party. And I know there's a whole lot of propaganda. There's a whole set of media lies that have been laid at the footsteps of Democrats forever. But you know what? Politics has always been hard, and excuses don't matter. So where does that leave us? On the one side, we have an autocrat who would transform America and American society in ways most of the country opposes. On the other, we have widespread opposition, but not too much more. To win, Democrats need to do the nearly impossible in a very short time and offer a set of ideas, new ideas that put our people first, that is reassuring enough to forge a new majority, and with sufficient energy and determination to convince voters that, we won't fail. Now, I said we shouldn't go back to the, our old party, as remarkable as it has been for 100 years, since World War II, not quite 100 years. But let me just remind you of something FDR said that isn't about policy, but it is about America, and it is as true today as it was in 1938 when he said it. I venture the challenging statement, he said, that if American democracy ceases to move forward as a living force, seeking day and night by peaceful means to better the lot of our citizens, fascism will grow in strength in our land. And so it has. I mean, look, compared to just a few generations ago, the world is more complicated. America is more diverse. The pace of change is far more rapid. The threats to democracy are more insidious, and the power of technology is massively greater. Americans feel all of this and are frustrated by a government that seems unable to meet these challenges in a way that puts their interests first. Why is that? I mean, they're right. Why is that? Well, gerrymandering has meant that our elected leaders work for, the folks who draw the maps, not the folks who elected them. Citizens United meant that our elected leaders work for the money that pours into politics, not the citizens who go to vote. And Americans are right in feeling that our democracy is not, moving as a living force to better our lot. And you know what? They don't distinguish between Democrats and Republicans. I know there are some politicians who this doesn't apply to, who are terrific and really trying to do the work, but this is how Americans feel. And the result is, of course, fascism growing in strength and power in our land. Look, the political media and most of the people who pay attention to politics are stuck. Reality has moved on from old ideas that divide us into conservative and progressive camps. The bundles of issues that characterize conservative and progressive are all broken apart. I mean, think about the people who who are progressive on social issues but conservative on foreign policy, or conservative on social issues but progressive on environmental ones. I mean, the packages aren't whole anymore. But we use these words, these shorthands that sort us in ways that don't feel genuine and keep us from building a stable majority. And I think there's a majority to be built here. In short, the old labels of left and right, I think, are a fool's game. And I know saying this is going to get me into trouble. This is, after all, proud progressive radio. I expect, some pushback to the idea that we should find a new path rather than doubling down on an older one. But ask somebody young what they think. And look, whatever you think, whatever I think, America isn't waiting for us to figure it out. Mr. Trump and his MAGA party offer America the reassurance of an autocrat who gets things done. I don't even have to comment on what those things are. Most people don't like them. Autocrats can be corrupt. Nobody holds that against them. It goes with the package. They accept terribly corrupt behavior from Donald Trump that they would never accept from anyone who pretends, who says he's leading a democracy. Donald Trump doesn't, and so nobody cares if he's corrupt. It's just part of the package. So what choice do Democrats offer in opposition except opposition? This is not yet clear. And, in the next months leading into the midterms and then certainly leading into the next general election, various candidates are going to offer differing visions of America and differing ideas about how to build a consensus. This isn't new, by the way. This isn't new. And this is something I'm hopeful about. Because, before the Civil War, because of the effort of slaveholders to expand their terrible institution everywhere, politics was broken. The old political parties failed. The South, those abhorrent people who led this effort to say all men aren't created equal and we should have slavery everywhere. They offered a clear vision. And the opposition was a mess of competing ideas that included fragments of Democrats, Whigs, and a new group that called themselves Republicans. And they weren't sure what they were about originally. Abe Lincoln cobbled them together to win, and then over time gave it new coherence, one focused on the deeply American values embedded in the Declaration of Independence, but at the same time, it was entirely forward-looking about the America they would build. The opposition to the tyranny today, the one that's on offer by MAGA and Donald Trump, it includes Democrats and refugees from the old Republican Party, and loads of people, let's be honest, who loathe both political parties, who just don't believe they have served us. And by the way, some people who would form new parties if that were possible. There is a new majority, a majority we haven't seen in politics in decades, waiting to be cobbled together. If we, and it's got to come from the Democrats, if we are big enough to see it. If we're big enough to see it. And we won't see it by looking backwards, and we won't see it by cobbling together a bunch of our own interests. We have to think about America right now. And so I urge us not to look back or to worry about entrenched interests, but to find common ground based on democratic values and in faith that we can and we will move forward, not by pushing people down, but by lifting each other up. And we're going to talk about these themes throughout the show today. I got a great show for you coming up right after the break with a fabulous conversation with the Atlantic's David Graham. You don't want to miss it.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
David Graham is a prize-winning staff writer at The Atlantic. He writes along with Tom Nichols, who you all know because he's been on the show, their fabulous daily newsletter. He's also the author of a new book, The Project, How Project 2025 is Reshaping America, and we'll talk about that. David, thanks for joining me and spending time with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Let me also introduce the other way around, my audience to you. Over the past few years, we've built a community of folks who have pretty diverse ideas about, a pile of policies that our government can choose from, but they all care very deeply about the democracy, and they're quite worried about it and always thinking about what they can do about it. And they're also pretty thoughtful. That's why we have these long-form discussions. All right. So before we get into specifics of your reporting, I just wonder if we could start, very broadly with a characterization of the moment we're in. I sort of get one from reading all your pieces, but I'd love to get your sense, sort of big picture about where we are.
It feels to me like we're in a precarious moment when many of the, the basic safeguards of democracy and of rule of law are under threat. And it's a little bit hard to tell exactly where we are. I mean, there's this, the situation here where you have the administration not outright defying court orders, but also not going along with them. So I think it's hard to tell quite where we are. There's a little bit of fog of war.
Well, that's literally what I was thinking. Yeah, it is fog of war, and it is kind of war, not happily with weapons, at least I don't think, but with all of the structures of our democracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right.
And I guess it isn't just the very big questions, and ones we'll get to when we talk about Project 2025. It's also sort of the long struggle over what our government should do. The frustration Americans have because they don't visibly see the progress of government. They don't understand what it does. I think they're beginning to now that it's going away. But how long it takes to build a bridge, how long it takes to get a runway at an airport. These things frustrate Americans. You wrote about the FAA. Talk a little bit about that. You said it was sort of a symbol of many problems.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, the kind of problems we're seeing with air traffic control and, the basic systems of the FAA. And I think it's a symptom of neglect over a long period of time where, we have these systems of government that we built in the past, and we've been trying to get by on funding them for very little for a long time to sort of do it on the cheap. And that can work for a while. We had this 16-year record of no commercial air crash fatalities. But underneath that, the FAA was really struggling. The systems are not updated. Controllers are working mandatory overtime. They're understaffed. And we've been getting warnings about that from the FAA and from outside panels and from airlines and from pilots for a long time. And it's only now that it's sort of started to break through. But it's the result of, I think, neglect by successive administrations and successive Congresses.
Well, I don't think it's just coming to a head. Didn't the infrastructure bill that we passed when Biden was president and Democrats were in Congress, I think there was like $1 billion in improvement for airports, and there was money for the FAA. So I don't think it's a new threat. I think you're right. We've been talking about it for a while, but I think we started to try and address it.
That's true. I mean, in 2024, the Biden administration requested $5 billion just to sustain operations at the FAA. So even that, I mean, they're asking for more money. Congress is reluctant to do that. Well, Congress can't pass the budget in the first place, right. And so you're not even meeting those obligations, even when the administration is asking for them.
Yeah. So this is a problem we know, and I'm going to say the right wing in America has convinced Americans that spending on government is a bad idea. Although I don't think they think spending on things like the FAA is a bad idea, or at least I didn't think that until this administration. Talk about the cuts, the personnel cuts, not just the infrastructure that we don't keep up, but what do the personnel cuts mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an ideology underlying this that, people want the FAA, but they believe, without really knowing a lot about how it works, that it can be done with lower staff. So there must be some sort of fat there. And what we're seeing is that isn't necessarily true. Under DOJ, the FAA has had a bunch of cuts, and it's a couple things. I mean, there's controllers who are on the job, and they're trying to retain controllers, but they're also cutting people who are in other important safety positions, people who understand how the organization works, people who understand the systems. And they may not be in the towers, but they're really important to making air safety work and making air traffic efficient as well. And those people are getting laid off by DOJ, or they're going to work and they're feeling underappreciated. They're feeling traumatized, as one of the authors of Project 2025 wanted, and they're quitting. And so you're losing people that way as well.
And I guess because they don't understand how the pieces fit together, when they cut NOAA, when they cut the National Weather Service, then pilots lack the information on where the turbulence is. They can't tell each other, and you end up with flights that are more dangerous, that cost more because it's more expensive, cost more in gas and everything else to fly through turbulent air. So these pieces all fit together, and I don't think that there's any evidence that the DOJ guys ever cared to try and understand that.
I think that's right. There's a real just lack of interest in government, like a proud ignorance. They didn't know how it worked. They didn't take the time to learn how it worked, and they're happy that they didn't learn because they think, that it can be solved by AI or something. It's
very dangerous. It's really very dangerous. The GOP's gutting of the IRS means our government can't efficiently collect revenues, I guess, except through payroll taxes on ordinary working folks. So the wealthy don't have to, they're not going to get audited, and they probably are not paying what they owe. I doubt we are now even able to collect the so-called tariff revenue because we don't have the people to do it. Have you ever seen the United States government dedicated, I guess, to the enrichment of one man?
No, I think it's new territory in that way, and it's happening. I think it's happening on so many fronts, and you're pointing out all the ways that these things are connected too. And I think that's really important and not always easy to see the whole picture of.
Yeah, well, but it's really important that Americans start to get a sense of what we have built together for the last, at least since the 1940 end of World War II. We built these things together, both domestically and abroad, that are all being destroyed now. And I think some of them needed to be fixed, but willy-nilly destroying them all and not understanding it seems crazy. And I don't see a purpose except for putting in a different kind of government. And let's talk a little bit about some of the grift, I guess. So Donald Trump takes a plane, or doesn't take a plane, but doesn't see anything wrong with taking $400 million plane from the Qataris. Gets mad at a reporter, says the reporter's an idiot for asking him why it's a bad idea to take a bribe. I'm a Chicagoan. I watched aldermen go to jail all my life for $1,500 to help somebody get a curb cut for an alley, for a driveway. And in this city, people are disgusted with politicians who profit off their job. Don't you think that's true of the whole country?
I think that's true. I think there's two things going on. It's both true that Americans are fed up with corruption, and at the same time, the Supreme Court is making it harder and harder to actually go after politicians for corruption by issuing rulings that even things that I think in the plain language of everyday life are obviously corrupt. They're obviously bribes. The Supreme Court is saying these things are not illegal. And so the system, corruption gets worse because more things are allowed, and that undermines faith in the system. And that I think allows the kind of disillusionment that has gotten us to this place where we are now.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the voters have to see corruption and act on it and not count on the courts to do it for the very reason that you suggested. I'm worried about a different kind of corruption. The president alone, in part because Speaker Johnson gave him this power and said, a day isn't a day, so we can't start the clock to undo it. They gave him the emergency powers to set tariffs however he wants. He sets tariffs very high and waits for somebody to come to him and say, I'll buy your Dogecoin if you'll give my business a break. For reasons that are, and I say that guessing, I don't know 100% that's true, but there is no transparency about why he lowers tariffs or raises them, right? We don't know. It's certainly not in the public interest.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And there's a great story also in ProPublica yesterday about how the government is pushing the federal government is pushing foreign governments to work with Elon Musk's companies as well, so that it extends past just Trump to people around him as well.
Yeah. But since tariffs are not an act of Congress, they're just the president can go away any moment. It's the corrupt gift that keeps on giving, right? If you don't play ball, I raise the tariff, your business suffers. If you play ball, I'll lower it. By the way, after I'm out of office, the next guy can do the same thing. And companies are not brave. They put their private financial interests ahead of their long-term interest, I believe, but also ahead of the democracy. We saw that with law firms that caved right away, all the New York law firms, these big ones. Isn't this the playbook for how democracy dies?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's just systematically reducing everything to a sort of authoritarian single branch of government that controls everything. And
it controls it through a system of corrupt relationships. I have power over you, therefore you serve me.
Yeah, it's very it's based around a single person and his interest.
Okay, so you and I have been talking for I don't know, because I turned my timer off. So oops. But let's maybe 12 minutes or so. And in that time, we've now determined that the U.S. government is being turned into what we saw in the 1700s with monarchies, what we see in the Middle East with absolute monarchies and the Gulf, where he loves to be. That this notion of a cabal of folks at the top who rule corruptly to maintain power is where America could be headed. And that is so depressing. I'm going to look for a silver lining in the half hour we have left, but we may not find one. Right? Because I want to turn to your writing about Project 2025. First, I don't think people, I've talked about it since it first came out in the show, but I still don't think people know what Project 2025 really is. And by that, I mean, we've talked about a bunch of policy recommendations that people don't like. But I think it's more than that. And you've written about this. It's a vision for a different America. Not just a different government, but a different society. Talk about that.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, even when I first started learning about Project 2025, I thought of it too much as a list of policies. And it has that. But I think what makes it different is, first of all, the way that it lays out a really careful set of methods for doing it. They've thought really deeply about how they want to take over the executive branch, how they want to, seize powers traditionally held by Congress, how they want to take over agencies traditionally not under the president's control, how they want to weaponize the Justice Department. And then all of those things are in the service of this vision of society. They want to rework society in their very conservative Christian vision. And I've tried, not always succeeded, to talk about Project 2025. I think it's not conservative. I think it's right wing, but it's not conservative in that it's a real change the way things have worked. And it also contemplates using government power as a sort of coercive or more than coercive force in a way that traditional American conservatives have resisted.
And so I agree with you. It's a radical rewrite of America. Talk, for example, about what Project 2025 envisions for gender roles in our society.
Yeah, so Project 2025 sees things, it wants to take things back to a sort of a vision of the 50s, I guess, or an idealized vision of the 50s. They want men to be the breadwinners working. They want mothers ideally at home raising lots of children. They want very strict traditional gender roles. They see anything outside of that as an example of gender ideology. They want to, in this case, literally write trans people out of the language of government. So it's a very sweeping plan to enforce these things. And then, of course, I think the idea of banning abortion nationally fits in that, too. That's part of the same vision of having lots of children and having this traditional vision of the family.
Right. Somebody said, is it contemplated that women won't be able to get credit cards? Without, the approval of some man in their life, which is, by the way, how it was in the 1950s.
That's right. And they don't talk about that specifically, but I think it's understandable that people have these sorts of questions when the overall vision is so backward looking.
Yeah, and not honestly backward looking. It's inventing a past that didn't exist.
Yes.
Yeah. Does it have does it talk about race relations in the same kind of way it talks about gender?
It talks about them in a little bit more veiled way. So, a lot of the things they talk about, I think they would say are colorblind. So they say, we need to have traditional families. We need marriage. And, they acknowledge that those things, or they point out that sometimes in racial minorities there are lower marriage rates. And they would say these things should be standard across the board. They talk about housing and urban development, and they worry about marriage rates there. So these things are a little bit coded talking about race. The other thing they want to do with race, there's a couple things, I guess. One is they say they want to get rid of DEI programs, and they're concerned about quote-unquote wokeness. They don't really define what that means. But then if you start looking at the details, it's a really sweeping plan to change a lot of what we have. So to take the enforcement of the voting rights in the Civil Rights Division of Justice Department, to move it from looking at voter suppression to looking at false claims of voter fraud in 2020. They want to use the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission not to enforce employment discrimination claims based on sex or on gender, but in fact based on anti-Christian discrimination. So there's a lot of these using the tools of government that have enforce what we think of as civil rights to enforce a totally different vision of rights and to make race much less important to how the government enforces the laws.
So Project 2025 doesn't explain pulling Jackie Robinson out of a library and leaving the bell curve in. That's just.
I think it does, insofar as it talks about DEI. They talk about DEI in this vague way, and it's hard to draw a line between where DEI ends and where reversing all of these other civil rights things starts. And I think that's the problem that they're seeing. And they understand what they're learning is these things are very unpopular, but they didn't draw the lines themselves. And so it's hard to avoid overstepping.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I warned about before the election that is part of Project 2025 that people don't know about. Project 2025 isn't just the book of policies. It was also the HR department for this administration. Talk a little bit about that and the training that went into the folks who are now running our government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things that came out of the first Trump administration, and in particular influenced some of the people who worked on Project 2025, was a frustration with the kinds of people who worked in political appointments in the first Trump administration. Obviously, we know Trump doesn't like the civil service. He talks about a deep state, and some of his aides do too. But they also felt like many of the people who staffed the first administration in political appointments were, George W. Bush people or rhinos or were out to sabotage Trump. And so they wanted to make sure that they had people who could be appointed on day one, who would be ready to go, and who were loyal to the project. And so they started gathering names in a database, which they said ran to 10,000 people who were interested in jobs and who had been identified and vetted, people who had gone through training that they put up. They made a series of training videos to train people on sort of the basics of government because they wanted to be able to appoint Trump loyalists the first day in office.
Yeah, I saw some of those videos. I went and put myself through seeing some of them. I don't think they trained people on how government works. I think they trained people how to use government for very specific ends. They didn't talk about the complexity you and I talked about before. They talked about how we could force out the people who aren't on our side. They talked about how we could finally get the things done that they won't let us do. They, in this case, I think is the Constitution, but they had pretty strong feelings about that.
That's right, and they want to like knock down all these protections that exist in the law for people in the civil service, for example. And they've been trying to, one reason we see judges ruling against them repeatedly is that these steps often are in violation of laws that are very explicit that Congress has passed.
I didn't see anything in Project 2025 that prepared us for the level of personal corruption, the grift, the buy my coin, or is that part of Project 2025 that I missed, or is that just a feature of Trump that is unrelated?
I think it's not in Project 2025, but it's enabled a little bit by Project 2025. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the authors here have a plan for the society they want and the federal government they want. And they have they are interested in a lot of issues. Trump is interested in only a very few things. He's interested in tariffs. He's interested in immigration. He's interested in personal revenge. And so there's a sort of symbiotic relationship where they get to put people in place who will move on a lot of their priorities, and he gets people who will do the things that he wants to do and fill out the rest. So when they want to give the president, nearly unfettered power to claim all these new powers to the executive branch, they're doing that in service of their policy goals, but he is taking advantage of that to use the sorts of grifts that we've seen.
Yeah, Greenland wasn't on your list of things that he wants.
No, I mean, it's interesting because it seems so to come out of nowhere. It's certainly not in Project 2025. So he does have these unpredictable passions that he gets obsessed with.
Yeah, I think, real estate has always been there, and he wants more of it. Whether it's in Gaza or Greenland, beachfront seems to matter to him.
Yes.
Were you able to? Well, let me stop there. What else do we need to know about Project 2025 and what it is doing to all of us?
I think one thing is it's important to look at you mentioned this with NOAA, but the level of environmental cuts I think are really remarkable. So they want to basically throw out any climate change related research, any climate change related regulation. They just don't want to track the numbers. And they also want to get rid of other environmental regulations. And we've seen this just in the last few days, trying to rewrite the rules on PFAS, so-called forever chemicals, to allow more of them in water. It's really, it just almost all of these things would go away. And they see even the Interior Department largely as an oil and gas extraction department of the government. They wanted it to encourage, as much as possible, more drilling for both gas and oil. So that's one thing. Another thing that I just think when we talk about the sorts of civil service cuts we're seeing, a lot of these things are done through executive orders, and some of them a future president can reverse those things. But some of these cuts, even when they're done through executive orders, are going to be so permanent because you can't simply hire these people back as soon as you have a new president. They're going to move on to other jobs. You can't restart research programs that have been going for a long time and are cut off. So I think that, the federal government that the next president inherits is going to be very different from the one that Trump inherited on January 20th.
Yeah, let's talk about long-term damage. It is much easier to break things than to put them back together. China had the Cultural Revolution. They got rid of their science in their universities because it didn't fit Mao's vision, and it took them nearly 40 years to rebuild that capability. And in many ways, they never fully recovered from the trauma of it. This is our cultural revolution. We have radicals trying to rewrite American culture, and they don't care what they destroy to do it. And your notion of research of these universities that have to close down research programs, you have a generation of PhD students and postdocs who are going to go find something else to do and never come back. The research is closed. We will not cure Alzheimer's. Maybe somebody in another country will, and the money for those drugs will flow to those countries and their businesses rather than American businesses. But that's something we can't fix just by getting rid of this administration. It's a slow rebuild, as it was a slow build in the first time.
That's exactly right. I think it's easier to break than it is to build is the watchword for a lot of these things.
Did you have a chance this week to hear any of the Supreme Court argument about, it was not really about birthright citizenship, and yet it was only about birthright citizenship, but the narrower issue was on nationwide injunctions. Were you able to hear any of that?
I've been reading some of the coverage and reading some of the transcripts, but I wasn't able to listen.
Yeah. Okay. Then I won't burden you with that conversation. But it was fabulous and fascinating. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I took from it that's related to what we've been talking about is that John Sauer, the Solicitor General, was not shy in saying our vision is to have it all. You know what? If we don't agree with you, we may not agree with you. To the Supreme Court. If there's an injunction in a district level, you know what? We're going to think about that. This was a really interesting challenge to the idea that the judiciary can set rules, can say what the law is.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also interesting to see conservatives very concerned about nationwide injunctions, having spent much of the Biden presidency relying on a particular single judge in Texas to get nationwide injunctions on policies from the Biden administration that they didn't like.
Yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy there, but then fairness, we've done that too. I mean, on both sides, sure. I think every president is frustrated by nationwide injunctions by, whoever the judge is. Right. But this is not a question of sort of he doesn't like it like the other side didn't like it. There's a reason why there are more now than ever before, because this is the most lawless president we've ever had.
Exactly. Yeah. It's hard to It's hard to even talk about hypocrisy when you're talking. We're not dealing with equivalent situations.
No, we're not. So what are you finding? You write this newsletter all the time, and do you and Tom write it together? Do you switch off? How does that work?
Tom spent 2+ years writing it almost every day, and now he's taking a step back and writing less in the newsletter, although he contributes some, and I'm mostly doing the newsletter most days.
Okay, and like, just tell everybody about it, because I think it's pretty great, and the kinds of things that you put in it, and the kinds of things that you look at and say, I'm not sure it belongs here.
Yeah. So it's a daily newsletter that we try to get to people towards the end of the day, 5 or 6 Eastern time, typically. We'll have important links to things that we have published every day, and then we'll have a short essay written by me and one of my colleagues, Tom, and occasionally other contributors. And we try to put people in what's going on in the news and to give them a sense of what's important on any day. Recently that's been a lot about national politics, so we try to make sure we're talking about other things too. It's an interesting balance of like what fits. I try to think, I don't want to write about something that's just an isolated news item. I want to write about something that kind of represents a bigger trend in the news. And I want to help people contextualize something. So they may or may not agree with what I'm saying, but I hope that I give them a kind of tools to think about the news in an effective way.
One of the things that I most regret, and politics has been a big part of my life since I was very young, and I'm not young at all anymore. But I regret terribly that it has become as big as it has, that almost everything is now seen through a political lens, and that it's eating other parts of our lives. And you know what? I like to go to the symphony. I like to go to a play. I like to go to a baseball game. I'd like to think that the people doing that don't have to spend their time thinking about politics all the time, that they can write the music or pitch, or do the other things that make life interesting. The world that you and I inhabit has been swallowed by politics. And yet, I saw recently you wrote, I'm not sure it was an obit, but you wrote about a recently gone music critic. Like, where did that come from? Why did you do that?
In a perfect world, I think I would be a music critic myself. And when I have the opportunity, I try to write about music. And in this case, there's a guy named Francis Davis, and he'd written for The Atlantic for many years, and was just a beautiful writer. And I thought him an important part of our story too. And so I love to be able to spotlight those things that are a little bit different when there's an opportunity.
And they're really important. I just want to spend time on that, on how, even if we are going to fight this political fight, how important it is to remember that we aren't fighting it for politics. We are fighting it for the life that we want to have together, and that life is rich and full and includes music and novels and sports and commerce, right? It's a big, full world that we can't narrow down just because we have a guy who wants to be our king.
I totally agree. And I worry about the way that politics does, especially now, kind of pervade every aspect of life. The way it's hard to have a conversation with a friend that doesn't lend itself back to politics. And I think that's a little bit of the totalizing, approach of the Trump administration, that whether you love or hate him, you have to think about Trump all the time. That's not a healthy way for any country to operate. It just doesn't function well, and it leaves out all those very important parts of life.
Yeah. What music do you love? Let's spend a little time on that.
Yeah.
What would you write about?
I love jazz. I would write about jazz all the time. I love country music and Americana as well. Really anything that comes out of the folk music of the U.S., I think, is the stuff that I love most.
Huh. So on the jazz world, the jazz world I grew up in were, pianists like Oscar Peterson, who, I got to see as a kid. And Earl Garner. And,
oh, cool.
George Shearing, people like that. In that era, they were my father's pianists, and he took me as a kid to go see them. What's going on in the jazz world like that?
I think there's a few currents that I think are really important. There's a bunch of musicians of the somewhat older generation who I think are just putting out incredible music. I think my favorite musician is the guitarist Bill Frisell, who is kind of a jazz musician, but really plays a wide range of things and I think spans American music. I think some of the stuff that I'm most interested in is music, including a lot of it coming out of Chicago, that is based on sort of trancy patterns and long undulating patterns, almost related to minimalism, and also inflected with other music. I mean, there's like an influence by hip hop that is often not so much about rap, but about beats and about repetition. And so I see musicians creating new forms and new fusions that I think are really intriguing.
Like whom?
One person I think is really great is the drummer Micaiah McCraven. Another one is the guitarist Jeff Parker. Those are two people I've been listening to a lot recently.
I'm writing that down. I have a son who works at a place called the Salt Shed, which is a big music venue here, fabulous new music venue, and he's always telling me about the artists who perform. And I say this, and and my audience understands this. If we don't take the time to water our roots with things that we care about that aren't politics, we will fail in the politics because we won't see past whatever it is that Donald Trump is yelling at us.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I worry about my own failure to read books originally. I feel like I spend so much time reading the news that I end up leaving not enough time to read other things. And I think that that impoverishes me. Well,
and you're a writer. So it's also doubly important to see, a lot of kinds of prose. Yeah. All right. So I raised this in our sort of last chunk of time together, in part because I want our listeners to understand that it is okay not to live only in this fight. And I think about that a little bit like, I don't know, it's old wisdom. It's Bhagavad Gita wisdom, where Arjuna leaves the battlefield to become refreshed before he goes back. There's a big fight in front of us. And people have to be able to leave the battlefield for a bit to have the strength because it's a long fight in front of us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If people are burned out immediately, they will be unable to stand up to the things they need. So you've got to avoid that.
Yeah, I'm even not worried about burnout, David. I'm worried about just burning. There has to be some tempering of our passion that helps us see a bigger picture. Otherwise, we will make
that's right.
our own cruel mistakes.
Yeah, that perspective is really important, keeping perspective.
Yeah. All right. So if I return to the news now that we've had our break from it, how do you think Americans are lining up to fight? We have governor's race in Virginia coming. We have done pretty well in, weird things like school board races in Texas, where every MAGA candidate lost. I think Americans are eager for their day. And I think MAGA voters, some of them are fully, they're in, they're going to stay in. But I think they've lost some luster, which means that the fight that's interesting right now is the one for the soul of the Democratic Party. And I see a generational fight. I see young people really furious with Chuck Schumer and the older guard and saying, you can't be the ones who lead us out of this wilderness. You're the ones who lost and got us here. And I don't blame the older Democrats for where we are, but young people do. And what do you think of the battle for the future of the Democratic Party? And what is a healthy outcome?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, one is you point to those victories, and they are I think we're going to see more of those because there is such backlash to what Trump is doing. One thing I would worry is that if Democrats simply win those elections because of backlash to Trump, they can't take that as a mandate in and of itself. And one of the things that I think is so important about Project 2025, and something that the right has done very well for a long time, whether it's on overturning Roe v. Wade or loosening gun laws, is being ready to play a long game and understanding that they will not win immediately, but if they can over time sort of work the systems and get to a place where they do control them. And I think Democrats need to think about that. What is their long-term plan? And this is true in Project 2025. They think about how they're going to achieve things and what they're going to do. So that's an important part of it. I also think Democrats, I mean, there's an important conversation, I suppose, to be had about the 2024 election. But, as we talk, I'm watching a news cycle that is entirely about Joe Biden. And it feels to me a little bit beside the point. Joe Biden is not going to run for president in 2028. I don't think somebody of Joe Biden's age is going to run for president in 2028 or anytime soon on the Democratic ticket. And it seems like the party needs to stop talking about 2024 and start thinking about 2026 and 2028.
Yeah, I think the party does not want to talk about 2024. I do think that stories that Democrats are worried and that they will be blamed for having not told the country that Joe Biden was old. Right. And I think that is as absurd a thing. That is the Republicans putting the fear of God in Democrats and once again making them sound stupid.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
that kind of jujitsu.
Yeah. I mean, like, okay, the whole country saw Joe as old and that wasn't new. And we like an energetic president. Even if we don't like everything they do, we like an energetic chief executive. That's it. We're an energetic country. So okay. Yeah. I mean, I just think there's this question of should the Democrats go middle or go left, which I also think is a bizarre question because the terms are no longer meaningful in some ways.
Right.
I mean, right? Are we talking about economics? Are we talking about civil rights? Are we talking about the institutions of democracy? They're all different questions. And where we come out on all of these questions, and they're big questions the country's wrestling with. The Republicans have said where they are. They've said where they are. They're in 1951 Disneyland made up nonsense, right? The Democrats have not yet said where they are. We are trying to figure it out. And I just think that the answer isn't going to be 1951 made up nonsense. It's going to be what the Democrats figure out if they figure it out.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important that is, it's a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to do. But I think one thing that the last few months have shown is the importance of Congress and making Congress work, because we've seen Republicans in Congress not doing anything to check Trump. But we've seen Congress sort of, deferring a lot of power to the executive for 20 years now. And I think for democracy to survive, we need to have a Congress that works better. And I think that's a really important place for Democrats to think.
Well, so David, you mentioned this earlier when you talked about the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court broke Congress. John Roberts broke Congress with Citizens United. And that decision that unleashed all of that dark money into our political system, despite a bipartisan law, the one that got overturned, McCain-Feingold, Democrat, Republican, saying, look, this money is corrupting our politics. We know it. We're the ones who feel it more than anybody else. And here's a law that will protect our politics. But John Roberts knew better. And so we have United. And that, I don't know that we can fix I don't know how to fix Congress with all this dark money. I don't know how to do it.
I would add to that also that the Supreme Court has also thrown up its hands at gerrymandering and said that it's not something it has any control over. That's a real problem, too. We don't have there's very few competitive districts left in Congress. That's another. All of these things are based on Supreme Court decisions, and that's troubling. But I think it's something we have to work around because we can't. Anything that yields the power only to the executive branch, pushes us towards authoritarianism. Yeah,
I read this week because it was timely, the Supreme Court decision in the 1950s when Harry Truman tried to there was a strike at a steel plant. We were at war in Korea, and he said, I need the steel for the tanks. We are going to nationalize the steel plant so that there isn't a strike so that we can have the steel. And the Supreme Court said, no, you're not. You don't have the power to do that. Mm-hmm. And Justice Jackson's ruling on that, he had been in the Nuremberg trials, and he just said, look, you know what? The power to declare an emergency should never be in the hands of the one who administers the emergency. So let Congress declare an emergency and never let the executive branch, because and he saw this in Europe in the 1930s. If you have the power to declare an emergency, you know what? Emergencies start to happen a whole lot more often.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we see Trump using emergency conditions as an excuse for so many of these things over and over.
Over and over. Over and over. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened in Europe in the 1930s. And I think Americans don't like it. I do. But we have to provide a positive alternative that says, here's what we want to do about the environment. Here's what we want to do about foreign trade. Here's what we want to do about restructuring the economy so that it works for working Americans. And I think those are and civil rights. And I mean, these are all really important questions our society is grappling with in the midst of huge technological change. It's a big and frightening challenge.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what we see is that voters repeatedly, when they have the opportunity and when they're exposed to Trump, vote against him. But then, we saw that in 2020, and we saw him come back in 2024 because Democrats couldn't convince voters of their alternatives. So it's really important to get that straight.
That's got to be our last word. David, tell everybody how they find your writing, how they sign up for your evening newsletter, and why they should read The Atlantic.
Yeah, so you can find me on theatlantic.com, and if you find my author page, it's David A. Graham. There's a great sign-up button for the Atlantic Daily newsletter, and we'll send that to you for free every day. I think The Atlantic is an important news source. We're an independent news source. We care a lot about democracy issues. We try to include a wide range of voices. And we want to give people, a smart way of thinking about the news. And I think we do it as well as anyone in the business.
I really appreciate your time today, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, David.
Listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I am really looking forward to the conversation with my next guest, but we seem to be having some trouble connecting. So let's use the time to talk, and let me hear from you. I said some pretty challenging things in that open about, wither the Democrats, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. And there's much else we could be talking about, too, at 773-763-9278. And particularly, this week, wow, what a bunch of news. Afrikaners, man. Afrikaners, they have ordered, the speed up of making sure that we can ease the way for this crowd of supposedly put upon citizens, former apartheid leaders, I guess, to move to the United States while we're throwing everybody else out. This is or we could even talk about the ridiculous, over-the-top bribery, corruption, whatever you want to call it, that we see in Trump's, personal business summit that he held in Riyadh. Pretty wild stuff, I think. But sure, let me know what you think, because, wow, that is, just incredible. I have this theory, and I wonder, what you think of this too, that just no one expects an autocratic ruler not to be corrupt. They just think it's part of the price of the stability that you get with an autocrat. Hence, nobody cares that Donald Trump is has made himself maybe the richest person in the world already in just a short time in office. And he's done it by accepting money, bribes, if you will. As he said to a reporter, when the reporter said, "Are you really thinking of taking a $500 billion airplane?" And he's like, or $500 million airplane. He's like, what kind of a stupid question is that? Why wouldn't we take this beautiful gift? That's who he is. That's how he thinks. That's how his sons think. And they're up there laying on new Trump towers and new Trump golf courses all over the Middle East. They're getting tons of personal money. Meanwhile, the House is trying to pass a budget that cuts Medicare, Medicaid. I don't know, in order to get more tax cuts. Seems pretty wild to me. But the Afrikaner stuff, I mean, who would have thought, right? Who in their right mind would have thought that we're turning our back on the whole world. We're saying to our traditional allies, we're going to fight with you. We're saying to Canada, for gosh sakes, we have this long, beautiful border with Canada, but we're saying, oh no, this is a danger to us. And instead, we are absurdly, worried about the plight of some Afrikaners. Is anybody besides, was anybody think that's crazy? I do. All right. Let's turn to some other things that are in the news. We had these terrible weather incidents this last couple of days, tornadoes, and I think, not a few people. I don't know the exact number, but it could be up to 30 people badly injured or killed in these storms. And we know the difference between living and dying in Tornado Alley, in this big chunk of the middle of the country, is having enough lead time, enough warning to get to a safe place. And it turns out that in Kansas and other places, the administration's fired the people who work, in the nights and in the weather offices around the country that would be able to warn people of these tornadoes. So we have people who are going to die because there's no warning for the storms. We already are seeing the incredible danger of the cuts to the FAA, not just Newark now, but we see lots of places understaffed and invested when it comes to the infrastructure we need to make air traffic safe. And of course, the daddy of all making us unsafe, RFK Jr. getting rid of food inspectors and making it harder to do medical research. And I don't know, testifying to Congress that he hasn't somehow fired a single scientist when so many scientists have been put out of business by this administration. I guess it's not just our lives, but our sense of truth that they're after. So I'm interested, yes, I said, I'm interested in your thoughts at 773-763-9278. And we're going to take a quick break because I've talked my throat to death. I need a minute to catch up. So, Paul, let's take a quick break and we'll come right back.
Biological, and my son is adopted. I love them both so much, from the morning when you wake up to putting them to bed at night and every moment in between. I think a parent's job is to protect our children, but also prepare them for the world so they become good, kind human beings.
That's dedication. Find out more at fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
This is a WCPT moment in labor. In the summer of 1909 in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, the workers of the Pressed Steel Car Company went on strike due to missing wages. 5,000 workers, mostly immigrants from Eastern European countries, walked out. They protested a corrupt payment system called pooling. The workers also claimed their wives and daughters were sexually assaulted in order to repay debts accumulated for food and housing. On average, one worker would die every day from the poor safety conditions. The workers received solidarity from the International Workers of the World, Standard Steel Car Company of Butler, and the railway trainmen and streetcar motormen who refused to haul scab workers into the city. The strike culminated in a bloody confrontation resulting in the deaths of at least 12 workers and one deputy sheriff, with many more workers injured. This led to a settlement which gave workers increased wages at a posted pay rate and ended the abuses of the company's housing practices. This has been a WCPT Moment in Labor. We're working for your rights.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, 773-763-9278. If there's something you want to talk about, I want to talk about this. Last week, Donald Trump signed what he claimed was the most important executive order ever. He said he's going to lower drug prices, and he's going to make sure that no American pays more than anyone the drug prices in the United States are no higher than they are wherever that drug is sold cheapest in the world. And he said immediately Americans are going to see their drug prices go down. No, Americans haven't seen that. Nope, not at all. He got the headlines, nothing happened, right? Because, he doesn't actually control prices. And today, he's demanding, he is saying that Walmart has to eat the tariffs. I'll be watching, he said. I'll be watching. You can't raise prices. Really? It's like, so you see, he wants to say to a private company, although he's raised their costs through tariffs, that they have to lower their costs somehow, that he can control their costs, that the pain that he's causing is something that they should feel and they're not allowed to pass on, which of course they will pass on. Once again, he's getting headlines pretending he's on our side when he's not. He's not on our side about drug prices. Otherwise, he wouldn't be getting rid of the science. He's not on our side about consumer prices. Otherwise, he wouldn't be raising them with tariffs. So I don't know why the press gives him the time of day with headlines that repeat what he says, when what he says is, get this, oh, surprise, surprise, a lie. Right? Flat out nonsense. So here we have these examples. We didn't see lower drug prices. We certainly aren't seeing lower consumer prices. He's brought about a new inflation. And God knows, the collection of those of us who are in the opposition to this man have to come together with a set of governing ideas that will move us forward. Right? And I have some. I've talked about some of them before. And I recently put out a piece on Substack about one of them. We don't move past this moment without really repudiating it. I think we will win, but what does that mean? One of the things it has to mean is telling the whole world that this was a break from our history, not this is who we are and we're going to go back and forth depending on, some key voters in Wisconsin for the next 20 years. We're going to teeter between this autocracy and a healthy democracy. That cannot be. When we take back power, and I believe we will, we have to reassert our democratic values. And that means dealing with Citizens United. It means dealing with voting rights, protecting them, really protecting them. And it means holding the insurrectionists accountable. But it also means turning the symbols of their fascist power into something else. And again, this is something I wrote about on Substack. Can you imagine? Well, don't imagine. Go to Berlin and you will see what they've done with the symbols of Nazi power. They've turned them into memorials and museums, learning about the horrors of that administration, that regime. The Wannsee House, where the final solution was agreed upon, is a stunning lesson in horror now. But it's not just in Germany. Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was a prisoner for so many years, is a museum and memorial, a reminder of reconciliation and moving forward that has helped South Africa overcome its apartheid era. And look, we did it here in the United States. We did it after the Civil War. We took Robert E. Lee's home and turned it into Arlington National Cemetery. We instead of giving it back to him, his slave camp, We instead said we will bury our honored dead who fought your rebellion, who fought against your rebellion, and we will give them an honored place here. Turning the symbols of fascist power, of authoritarian power, of anti-democratic malice into lessons. This is really important. And what is right now in America the biggest symbol of fascist power? What is the place that people go to kiss the ring? What is the place they go to bend the knee? Mar-a-Lago, that gold-encrusted dining room in Mar-a-Lago. I am pushing for, and I hope you will join me in calling your congressman and everyone you can about this. When we win, Mar-a-Lago must be taken, either through a criminal forfeiture or through eminent domain. There are plenty of ways the federal government can take private property. It must be taken and turned into a Smithsonian museum for the study of American fascism. There are plenty of exhibits. Can you imagine the bathroom with all the stolen documents as an exhibit? You know, I mean, we really can talk about in this room, the corporate America came and sat and begged for a deal. Donald Trump said, I will put a tariff on that will wreck your business. Come to Mar-a-Lago and talk. And so they came to Mar-a-Lago and they bought the meme coin and the tariffs went away or got reduced or something. This is, you know, a terrible fascist story, and we need to tell it. And I think that is one very powerful way, taking Mar-a-Lago and transforming it into a place that teaches this history rather than a terrifying place that is a symbol of fascist power in America. I mean, if it were up to me, well, if it weren't fake, it's all fake, I would take the gold plating he's added to the Oval Office and melt it down and give it to one of his first victims, the charity arm of the Lutheran Church, which he went after in his first weeks in office. I mean, there's much we can do, but we have to have the courage to do it. Going after Mar-a-Lago, you bet. Securing voting rights, absolutely. Absolutely. Undoing Citizens United, of course. These will restore our democracy. And when I say voting rights, I mean make it harder to do gerrymanders. Make it so that voters can pick the people who govern for us and hold them accountable. Because that when there is accountability, then you start to work for the people who put you there. That's how we end up getting government once again to work for America, to work in a way that is, what was it FDR said? Every day trying to make the lives of ordinary Americans better. Otherwise, fascism will grow in the land. And so it has grown. So we have the Afrikaners coming. We have Trump lying and getting good press about it every day. Crazy. We had his trip to the Middle East, where he pretended he was an emir or a king and got treated like it with the same kind of, oh, well, if you're the boss, we need to pay you, because that's how it works over there. And then we have this, use of government where they, on our side, they indicted a judge in Wisconsin. They not only perp walked her out of her courtroom, but then they indicted her. They won't win that case, but this is the abuse of power that they feel entitled to. And we have them going after James Comey now because he piled some rocks together, took a picture, of some rocks that on the beach that form some message that some crazy people on the right are assuming is a death threat to the president of the United States, to Donald Trump. Be serious. I mean, Donald Trump's the one who talks about, shooting people. He talked about shooting Liz Cheney, for God's sake. And he was the president when he did it. It's this guy who used to be attorney general, takes a picture of some rocks, and now this isn't a joke. The FBI is investigating him for threatening the life of the president. We have seen Pam Bondi completely walk away from her oath of office and any of the requirements of being a lawyer to use the law as a weapon, as they do in totalitarian places everywhere. So I don't know. It seems very clear to me that we have that the opposition has plenty to rally around. Right? We can rally. Pick your poison. If you care about our environmental future, they've walked away entirely. They want to give oil and gas rights all over public lands. This is what they think we should do. They want to take, weirdly, want to make life miserable for our Canadian allies. They want to take Greenland. They want to do all kinds of crazy things. But what they really want is to stay in power, and to enrich themselves while they do it. Can you imagine that the government of the United States now exists for the purpose of enriching one man? That is as disgusting and depressing a thought as there is. But I see all over the country that Americans don't like that. And Americans are eager to fight back, that we will have our say. He won't be able to cancel our elections. He won't be able to do that. He'll be able to say they're fraudulent, but we've heard that lie before. We're going to vote. We're going to vote like crazy and make a change. But when we do, we need to be able to move the country forward again. We'll be right back here if we do not improve the lives of people everywhere. And that, that has nothing to do with most of the issues that we keep talking about, that the Republicans keep talking about. They keep picking these wedge issues and slamming them as if that's the core of who Democrats are. Instead, we have to say everyone is of value. Everyone. You don't get to marginalize anybody, but we are determined to deal with this wealth inequality. We are determined that when people work, they're going to get paid for the value of their work, and it isn't all going to go to the folks who own everything. Right? And there's going to be plenty of effort, and you're going to see it and you're seeing it in the government already, to get rid of people, because people are expensive, and replace them with AI, and replace them with robots, or replace them with anything they don't have to pay. Okay, maybe some work goes away. What are the rest of the people supposed to do? Maybe George Bush was right and we need an ownership society. Whatever it is, we have to be in the forefront of creating it. The world is changing, and Democrats have to be offering new solutions that fit our time. And we have to have the courage to make them happen. I'm seeing some of it. I'm seeing some of it in the chaos of the rallies around the country, in the cacophony of different Democratic voices out there, sort of, would-be presidential contenders, would-be governors. They're out there testing messages, seeing how to build a big tent, one that appeals broadly. Some think the tip of the spear is the place to be, and that spear being opposition to Trump. Some think what we have called a progressive agenda is the place to be. Some think it's a broader middle. Some are sort of uniquely different, doing all kinds of different things, but coherent to a different kind of image. And I don't know what Americans are going to choose. I don't think anybody does, which is why this noisiness is a feature, not a flaw of our democracy. We're going to give people a chance to decide, because there's something new coming. And it's either going to be autocratic America, something we haven't had since 1775, or it's going to be something completely different, some new kind of democracy. All right, I guess I have talked myself to the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break for the news. And when we come back, I'm going to be joined by Tamar Jacoby, and we're going to talk about the future of Ukraine, which is really interesting too. So don't go away.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, we are back, and Tamar Jacob is back with us. She is the Kiev-based director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She's joined us, I think, 2 or 3 times to talk about what's happening in that imperiled nation. She came to that post after a long career as a journalist and an author, and I think our last couple conversations, Tamara, have been fabulous. I'm eager to hear, what's going on, because I don't understand where we are with Ukraine right now.
Well, you're kind, and thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be back on the show.
Thank you. Look, help me understand this, because initially I feared that Donald Trump would do more to impose a catastrophic loss in Ukraine in order to normalize relations with Putin and Moscow. That hasn't yet happened. It may happen, it may not happen. Do I misread Trump, or has Europe stepped up to make that harder, or is it something else entirely?
No, you don't misread Trump. Who the heck knows? I'm not a psychotherapist, and I don't know the secret history, and who knows what's behind Trump's affinity for Putin or admiration for Putin, but there is certainly something there. Whether it's just to make business deals, who the heck knows? But so far he has been very tough. He's pretended to be a neutral broker, and he's been very tough on Ukraine to the point of, in fact, imperiling it quite severely at some points, not to mention insulting it and berating it and disrespecting it, and imposed no hardships at all and no screws on Putin. Whether or not in the end Trump will impose an unfair peace is still uncertain. And Europe is trying to help. There's only so much Europe can do. The Europeans mean well. The Europeans are trying hard as heck. The Europeans understand the situation in a way Americans don't. But there's only so much they can do between certainly, but there's only so much they can do about Trump, and there's only so much they can do between Putin and Trump. I'll stop there for a minute. We can go into details, but that's sort of the big picture.
Well, but Europe has, I think, I don't know, sort of been shocked into realizing that their future and the United States' future are not necessarily entwined, that they have to defend themselves, that they can't rely on us anymore. That's been Trump's message, and I think they have heard it.
Well, and it's been, to be fair, it's been the message of every American president, since Eisenhower, and it's certainly Putin's message as well. So Trump has helped, and Trump has hit them over the head with a 2x4, as Keith Kellogg said once. But let's not entirely, let's not give Trump all the credit. The good news is Europe is trying to bring itself together, to rearm, to spend more money, to build the industries, to act in concert. But it's very challenging. We're talking about 3 dozen, not quite, two plus dozen countries with different agendas, and they all are proud heads of states, and very importantly, their defense industries are not only in disuse, they haven't been working much lately, but they don't coordinate very well. So, literally the analogy made by one important EU official was you try to take a high-speed train from London across the continent, and the trains don't connect. The French make a different kind of tank from the Germans, make a different kind of tank from the Poles, make a different kind of tank from the Swedes, and they're supposed to be interoperable, but they aren't really. And so the political dimension of cooperating is hard. Finding the money is hard in countries that are all, facing fiscal challenges, and then building the defense industry. So sometimes, it looks like there's not enough money, but sometimes it looks like there's more money than capacity. And so it's a big challenge in Europe, and they're working, they're trying, but it does often, for all the goodwill, seem like more talk than action. There was all that talk about peacekeeping troops. Well, there's no peace. Nobody but Ukrainians want to die in Ukraine, turns out.
talk to me about the mineral deal. Again, it's not what Donald Trump said it was going to be, namely taking the future mineral profits of Ukraine in order to pay for past arms deals.
No, that's
not
true.
What happened.
I mean, America still stands to benefit if they're. I mean, the minerals are. There are a lot of minerals in Ukraine. I'm not an expert in this, but there are a lot of minerals in Ukraine, very valuable minerals, but they've not been mined. There are no mines, and they're in places where there are the other kind of mines, like you can't get there because the ground explodes, and it will take probably trillions of dollars to make those mines workable. If there ever is real mining of the Ukrainian minerals, the United States is now in a position to make some good money out of it. It doesn't have what should we call extortionary rights anymore, and the money's not being counted on to pay for past American donations of weaponry, but it could end up at some point being some kind of advantageous deal for some American businesses. Zelensky's hope all along is that it would give America a vested interest in Ukraine, and I think at some level it does that. Is that vested interest in any way, commensurate with what seems to be Trump's deep bond with Putin? No. The important thing here, though, for the big picture, before we can talk about Istanbul, we can talk about all other kinds of things. The important thing here is Russia doesn't want to stop fighting because they think they're on a roll. And Ukraine does want to stop fighting, not because they're not losing, but they're tired of the war. And they don't see a way that they're going to win on the battlefield anytime soon. So Zelensky honestly wants peace, and I think most Ukrainians do, and Putin does not. And and Trump doesn't, it's not clear that Trump understands that. But the other big challenge is that only America can really end this war. It's not going to end, certainly not in the foreseeable future with Ukrainian victories, as I say, on the battlefield. The only way it's going to end is if the West, Europe and the U.S. together put enough pressure on Putin to stop. And it's not clear that's going to happen. Europe is going to try, and maybe Trump will come around to it, but it's I wouldn't bet anything on it.
Well, I have a sense. First, on the minerals, I'm glad that America now has a stake in Ukraine's future. Granted, it's not huge and may not offset Trump's predilection for Putin, but it's at least a sign that we have some interest in its future. I like that. Yep. But I have a worry that in not standing up in Ukraine to Putin, the U.S. helping Europe defend Ukraine such that Putin decides he can't continue this war, that it risks spilling out of Ukraine and into Poland, and then we have an enormous, wider, more dangerous war, and that has always been the risk, and that Joe Biden understood that risk.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if Joe Biden understood it correctly, but I mean, I think the thinking in Europe is that once the war ends here. It's hard. Russia can't do both at once. It can hardly, take a few kilometers in Ukraine. But once the war ends here, Russia immediately is going to lick its wounds, recruit more men, fix the weaponry, and move lots of troops to the border, mostly of the Baltics, also Poland, but mostly the Baltics. Mm-hmm. And Europe definitely thinks that there certainly will be some kind of aggression in the 5 years after the Ukrainian war ends, whether it's actually tanks rolling across the border or just more of things like cutting the undersea cables in the Baltic Sea and starting an arson in Warsaw shopping malls and assassination attempts on CEOs. There's going to be more and disinformation. There's going to be more of, it's a spectrum of things that Russia can do, and Europe expects a heck of a lot more. And that's why the Ukraine fight is so important to them. They're not I mean, they're doing it to some degree out of values and common Democrats and all that kind of stuff. But it's, in large part, it's true that Ukrainians are dying, so Europeans don't have to. And that's the Europeans. That's something Europeans get, and Americans either don't get or don't care because it's far away.
Well, I mean, I think you should say more because it's not commonly known here. Like, talk about the shopping center fire and what that was and why that scared people.
After the Russian invasion, I mean, the KGB, right? People watch spy shows, right? Like I watch nothing but spy shows, so I know them well. But I mean, remember the Americans? Like, what spies do is, they try to find information, but they also disrupt. And so you can cause incredible, not just create terror by disruption. You can cause political problems because the voters on one side think this and vote a certain way because they're afraid of the disruption. So Putin is a KGB guy, and he has been, and covert action has been, and what now is now called hybrid war and sabotage has been a leading Russian tactic for decades, if not hundreds of years, and it's increased significantly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because European diplomats, European countries kicked a lot of Russian diplomats out of the country and sent them home. And so now, instead of having like some guy in the embassy be the covert action guy, Russia started hiring like common criminals. And what they started hiring these common criminals to do, these common criminals aren't so good at the spycraft, but they're real good at blowing up trains and blowing up shopping centers and things like that. So there's been a rash. A rash doesn't encompass it. A huge wave of what's called hybrid or gray zone warfare in Europe. And it included things like a major shopping center in Warsaw was lit on fire 18 months ago. And some common criminal tried to assassinate the CEO of a big German arms company. And these ships, they're they're shadow fleet tankers. They're often Chinese tankers, or they're registered in Malta or some African country, but they're really shipping Russian oil. They float through the Baltic Sea and they drop their anchor and they cut the electric cable, connecting Denmark to Estonia. And there's endless ways to do this, not to mention disrupting elections, right? Propaganda to disrupt, and misinformation and bots and cyber stuff to disrupt elections. And so Russia's just up to this activity. And I guess the biggest really where the Americans finally said, wait a minute, there were a bunch of devices shipped by DHL last summer that turned out to be primed to explode while they were on airplanes over the Atlantic, killing lots of people and falling into the sea. And there was Germany recently found another plot like that. So, I mean, it sounds, sabotage doesn't really do it justice. It's low-grade warfare.
And we are clear that this is the work of Putin and the Russians, yes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not I don't run an intelligence agency, but several people who do run agencies in Europe think so.
Yeah. Well, when we were clear that was coming from the Middle East, the world went to war.
Right.
That's right. So now we have the same behavior coming from Russia, and Donald Trump just wants to build a hotel there.
Right. I mean, it's a little subtler, but the behavior. I mean, it's not planes into buildings yet, right? But
you just said planes blowing up over the Atlantic.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
Nothing subtle about that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's change a little bit. You initially, I think you took on this job before the war.
No, right after it broke out.
Right after it broke out, I see. But you were there, I think, to help Ukraine move towards a more democratic and less corrupt governance.
Well, that's my idea. That's my idea. So I came because of the war, and to witness the war, to write about the war, to try to be helpful. But all along, I have felt that the real purpose of the war and the reason the war matters is not just to kick the Russians out of some villages, but because what Ukraine wants is to make its own choices about its future, not Russian choices. And the choices it wants to make overwhelmingly are in favor of democracy, in favor of free markets, in favor of the West. And so, all along I felt that the important struggle is as existential and important and difficult as winning the war is. The important struggle is going to be winning the peace. But it's hard to get on with it too seriously. There's some progress now, and we can talk about that. But it's hard to do that too seriously while you're also fighting a war.
Well, right, and fighting an existential war can be a reason for autocratic backsliding.
Yeah.
It almost always is. So I'm interested that you think there is actually progress in the other direction, even in the face of this war. Let's talk about the kind of
progress. Let's talk about the progress, because one of the most, there's progress. There's democracy, right? There's open markets, right? There's several different dimensions to this, right? The drone industry is the most amazing thing to happen in Ukraine, since the war. And the drone industry is not just amazing technologically and, militarily, strategically. Ukraine could make about 1,000 drones a year the first year of the war. Now, this year, they're going to make 4.5 million. And 80% of the casualties on the front are done by drones. And Ukraine makes 90% of its own drones. So it's turned into a Ukrainian drone war. But it's not; those aren't the most amazing things in a way to me about the drone. Or they're as amazing as those are, they aren't the only amazing thing about the drone industry phenomenon. The point about it is that typically in Ukraine, as in the Soviet Union, a choice like that, a job like that, build new weaponry for the war we're in the middle of, would have been given to a great big behemoth, state-owned, bureaucratic, corrupt, quote-unquote company run by an oligarch that would have taken forever to build the darn things, and they wouldn't have been very good when they were done. And instead, an inspired young bureaucrat said, no, we're going to do this the Silicon Valley way. We're going to fund and encourage startups. And we're going to loosen those regulations that make it so hard for small and medium-sized businesses to do business against the behemoths. We're going to loosen them and let these startups really, have a run at it. And these startups have been amazing. And it's a triumph of what free market capitalism can do when unleashed, and entrepreneurialism and innovation. We all are Silicon Valley. The bloom is off the rose of Silicon Valley. Are they cool guys or are they plutocrats? But once upon a time, they were cool young innovators, who were finding ways to do something that helped the world. And that's really what the drone industry is like. And can that model be turned on the rest of the Ukrainian economy when the war is over? Well, we'll see. There's far too many still big behemoths, state-owned behemoths that run stuff here, and the rule of law, the bureaucracy, the regulation, and somewhat questionable rule of law make it really hard for small and medium-sized businesses to really compete effectively. Well, the Ukraine industry proves that it's not for want of entrepreneurial spirit here. So that's a very cool thing and a good thing. Politically, yes, war encourages the central government to take more control. And there's a lot of Ukrainians who are upset about that, who feel that Zelensky has taken too much control. And the example that bothers people the most is the TV channels. There used to be, 5, 6, 8, I don't know how many major TV channels. They were owned by oligarchs, but they were still competitive and different and what have you, TV channels. And at the beginning of the war, the government took them all over and said, we're going to run the same programming on all of them all day long. So, you turn from Channel 2 to Channel 5 and it's the same thing. Like as in America, not so many Ukrainians get their news from TV anymore, but it's a big damn problem politics when the government controls basically all the big media. And so opposition politicians, to the degree they exist, complain a lot. We can't get any airtime. We can't get any money. There's no real politics yet, and they're not wrong. And it's a problem that's imposed in a situation where that was problematic to begin with, because there are no real political parties in Ukraine. It's only been a democracy for 30 years. Not even really that long, and it's mostly factions around one guy. So there's the Zelensky faction, and before that there was the Poroshenko faction, and before that there was the somebody else faction, and there's no party that sort of remains some kind of stable thing that an apparatus with money and funding and reach that can develop a leadership. So the politics, they're going to have a long way to go. And Zelensky has been very bolstered politically by Trump. He was been on a long, slow decline since the war began, in popular opinion. But the Oval Office gave him a huge boost, as did the last week or so, and so he's back up to 75% support or something. And he's a very able leader, but power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and so there is a temptation for the central government to overreach in a system where there aren't enough checks and balances anyway. So the answer is there's a lot of work to be done. The short answer is that there's a lot of work to be done on both Ukrainian politics and Ukrainian market economy. And that's why we want the war to end in such a way, or I want the war to end in such a way that Ukrainians feel good enough about the outcome that they can sort of get on with that in good spirits, as opposed to in a funk of defeat really.
Okay, so in that, with that as the sort of current state of things, Zelensky is off to Istanbul, and ostensibly there's going to be a meeting with Putin. Is that?
That already didn't happen. So
Putin didn't show up.
Putin didn't show up, and so the deal there was that both Zelensky really wants peace, Putin does not, but they both have to look to Trump. They're doing an act for Trump to look like they're the one that wants peace more, and the other one is the obstacle. And so it's a big play, a big drama, and the Europeans and Ukraine said, let's have a 30-day ceasefire, and Trump said, great. And then Putin said, no 30-day ceasefire. Let's go talk in Istanbul instead. And he meant, low-level teams. And Zelensky called his bluff, and he said, okay, I'll see you in Istanbul on Thursday. Like, literally, I'll be there, you be there, be square. And Zelensky's bet was that Putin would not show, as indeed he did not, and that would reveal to Trump finally, forever and clearly, that Putin didn't want peace. And, there was no literal image like this, but the metaphoric image, and they made a meal of it on Ukrainian social media, is Zelensky sitting in a chair at a negotiating table and an empty chair opposite. And the idea was even Trump can understand that. Putin doesn't want to talk, and Zelensky's ready to talk. The question is, does Trump understand it? It's not clear that he does. After the meeting, he made excuses for Putin. He said, oh, well, I wouldn't have gone either. That's not the reaction should be, why weren't you there, Vladimir? And supposedly Trump is going to call them both on Monday. We don't know what he's going to say. And the danger is, and now we're coming full circle to where we started, there's still a danger that Trump will talk to one side and then talk to the other side and then propose some peace that he thinks is halfway in the middle without understanding the real situation. Because it's not a situation where halfway in the middle is the right answer. And you have to know the situation, which of course Trump doesn't really. And, so there is still the danger that Trump will impose an impossible, or try to impose an impossible peace on Ukraine. So we will see what happens Monday. It's an ongoing drama. And it's possible that nothing will happen.
Okay. And tell Americans who are seeing their own democracy imperiled, I would say broken, trying to restore it or trying to transform the country into something it hasn't been in a long time. We're in the midst of this incredible fight here about our future. Why should we care about this battle in Ukraine?
Well, we should care about it because it isn't really about Russia does threaten the West. What Russia's always wanted has been to disrupt the West, disrupt relations between Europe and the U.S. so that it can have a free hand in Europe. I mean, that's the kind of thing we intervened to stop when it was Germany doing it, twice in the last century. This is somebody who wants to, take over Europe and remake Europe in his own image. And we should care about that because Europe is collectively, still our biggest trading partner, or close, and the other part of the world that shares our values. And, if we're going to have a coming conflict or coming competition with China, we're going to need our allies.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump cares about our allies. Canada, for gosh sakes, the longest, freest, most peaceful border between two countries on the planet. And Donald Trump has turned the Canadians.
Ask me why. You didn't ask me how I would persuade Donald Trump. You asked me why Americans should care.
Yes, you're right.
How to persuade Donald Trump. How to persuade Donald Trump is a different issue. And, there are a few little green shoots of hope there. One is that, Americans aren't going to like the idea of that America lost the war in Ukraine, right? Like, that is not going to be a good look for Trump. And if he looks like the guy who lost Ukraine, I think that's going to be hard even for him to explain away. So that's, I actually think that's sort of Ukraine's best. I wouldn't say to call it a guarantee, but that's that's in a way some kind of, and I wouldn't even call it a safety net, but it's some kind of thread of hope going forward.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I really do. Listen, and how is the mood on the street?
Ukrainians are so resilient. There's no, you can't, there's, you can't hurt us. We're Ukrainian. Life goes on. People buy apartments, people get married, people have babies, people go out to eat, and to be fair, the war is pretty far away from Kyiv. It's a lot different, in the cities closer to the front, but life goes on here, and people are both very tough and also used to being in the battleground between East and West. They've been in the battleground between East and West for hundreds of years. And they're not surprised when they're betrayed. They're not surprised when they're attacked. They're not surprised when they're stuck in the middle. They're not surprised when they're betrayed. And so it rolls over them in a strange way. There was shock and fear after the Oval Office thing. People did have the Oval Office brawl. People did have hope that Trump was actually going to help them. They thought after all this time of Biden's, giving them just enough to fight off the Russians, but not enough to win, that Trump was going to be more decisive. And it didn't really occur to most of them that it could be decisive in a bad way. And the Oval Office and the halting of the ammunition and the intelligence for a week spooked people pretty badly. But, they're back. They've bounced back, and it's life normal. And, people say they will go on fighting, no matter what. America walks away. Well, we make our own drones now. They don't again, they don't make enough of anything to win, but they do make enough to go on fighting for quite a while. And, that determination has not flagged.
Are you writing a book about your experience here?
No. I mean, maybe someday I will, but I mean, do people even read books anymore? That's not clear.
Yes, we do.
Well, maybe I should. I'll tell them.
I mean, you have a seat like John Reed had, in Russia when the Tsar was falling. It's just it's got to be fascinating and interesting. It's fascinating.
No, it's definitely fascinating. Well, you and I should have a conversation sometime where there's no mics, and you can help me think through what kind of book might sell the song.
Done deal. We'll have that conversation. All right, we're out of time though tomorrow, and I really appreciate your time and your your reporting on life and the state of things from Kiev.
Well, you're kind to give me the opportunity to talk about it. I'll see you again soon.
You bet. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a break and come back to the domestic side after the news.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okie dokie. Welcome back. A little after 3 o'clock here in the upper Midwest, and Amanda Marcotte is back. She is, of course, the senior politics writer at Salon, the author of Troll Nation, How the Right Became a Trump-Worshipping Monsters, set on rat-effing liberals America and the truth itself. You have to read her newsletter, her politics newsletter, Standing Room Only. It's fabulous. And, Amanda, you have a new project. You're now doing podcasts.
Yeah, a YouTube series called Standing Room Only. We have one episode out, but we're really excited. We think it's already doing great. It's already a great show, and I really hope people come check it out.
Well, I did, and honestly, your deep dive into the MAGA prayer app was just too fun not to talk about here as well.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad you liked it.
I did. Well, tell everybody about that. That was just wild.
Sure. Hallow is this prayer app that you've probably seen advertised if you're online very much at all. It has ads by Gwen Stefani and Chris Pratt and Mark Wahlberg, so it's really well financed, right? They had Russell Brand for a hot minute, but they fired him after he was formally charged with rape in Great Britain. And it's pitched as an apolitical app, like just a prayer app. It's Catholic, which they kind of downplay in the ads, but once you're on there, you're like, oh no, this is super Catholic.
Well, Amanda, what is a prayer app? What does that even mean? A prayer app? Who needs an app to pray?
Some people call it a pay-to-pray app. It is just a bunch of audio programs, really. A lot of them are like mini sermons. Some of them are like actual prayers, like doing a rosary, a lot of it. And then there's courses. There's a lot of like programs on, how to be. I listened to one called The Feminine Genius, which was like how to be a good woman.
Yeah, you talked about that, and I think you could talk about that here. That was hysterical.
Yeah, I was like, what is the feminine genius? That's fascinating. And like once I started listening, it was this woman named Lisa Cotter, and she was drawing heavily on John Paul II's teachings. And it was basically that like what she called the feminine genius was just this notion that women are uniquely made to be submissive, giving, receiving, but in a submissive way. But basically that women were meant to be the support system of, men especially, but also like families, communities, just traditional sexist gender stuff. But, spun in this like flattering way, like, aren't you a genius because you never say no to people?
Look, there's a lot to honor in service of all kinds, but there's also a lot to honor in leadership and in strength. And the women in my life have plenty of strength and leadership and mind of their own, and that makes them fabulous and interesting.
Yeah, and what's funny is, of course, they don't want to deny that because it makes the sexism too obvious, but over and over again, she says, stop trying to be like a man. And it's like, well, what is like a man? And that just means, doing things like taking leadership roles and being in charge, at least of real world stuff, as opposed to like just, the ladies' luncheon or something.
Yeah. Well, your podcast, which talked about that and other things, our YouTube channel, I'm not sure what it is fabulous. Tell people how to get it.
Yeah, so go to Salons, go to YouTube and search for Salon TV. That's our feed. And we've got a bunch of different content on there, but it's standing room only. You'll see the first app. It's me making a goofy face, which is standard YouTube fare. And it says, "This is weird," and has pictures of Gwen Stefani and Chris Pratt and Mark Wahlberg, who are all on the app as well as in their ads.
Yeah, wild. Anyway, I enjoyed it. It was a very good use of time. So I encourage people who are listening, if you like listening to stuff, and this one is video. It's not all like listening like this.
I love watching YouTube while I cook. It's a great time to take in shows like this.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. All right, I'm looking forward to being on it someday. It sounds like a lot of fun. Now, I got to ask you about a couple other things.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yes.
Afrikaners.
Oh, I was like, Africa, the content. It's great.
Yeah.
Afrikaners. Yeah. I don't want to bash like white Afrikaners like as a category of people. I had a friend who was Afrikaner in college, and he was great. I think that the issue here, though, is that there's long been this conspiracy theory in neo-Nazi and white nationalist circles that white South Africans, Afrikaners, are being genocided, that they're being targeted for murder, and that the South African government, which is, heavily black in its leadership, is turning the other way or even encouraging, these murders. And it's all not true. But I think it's a popular conspiracy theory among neo-Nazis because it makes their kind of underlying argument of white nationalists and neo-Nazis is that if you let people of color have any power, they will do to white people what white people have done for centuries to them. So it's in a sense like self-protection to deny people of color rights and citizenship. And the Trump administration has taken this conspiracy theory and validated it by giving a bunch of white Afrikaners refugee status when they won't give it to anyone else in the world, basically. Right. And use this conspiracy theory as justification. So it's just the latest example of the Trump administration taking their talking points and policy ideas directly from neo-Nazis. And it frustrates me because when you say it out loud, people think you're cuckoo bananas, but...
Well, you said at the beginning, this theory, percolates in neo-Nazi and white nationalist circles. And I just thought you were using that as a metaphor for the White House.
No. The white genocide conspiracy theory using South Africa, like this myth that white people in South Africa are getting murdered, targeted for hate crimes, targeted for genocide. That's the myth. Obviously, people of every race get murdered, but it was originated in neo-Nazi circles.
Yeah.
This is not a lot of the talking points, especially the ones that you can tell come from Stephen Miller, are from to people who study this stuff. It's very recognizably David Duke and Stormfront came up with that. That sort of thing. That this is an idea that used to only exist in neo-Nazi forums.
Yeah, but now is trumpeted by the White House. Yep. Okay, enough of the Afrikaners. I don't, I want to get your thoughts on whether the Democratic Party. I mean, what's on offer from the Republicans is now clear. They've figured out who they are. It took them a while. I mean, they're not the party of Ronald Reagan. They're not the party of Richard Nixon. They're not even the party of W. The party they have now is, as you've described, closely aligned with sort of neo-Nazi white nationalist thinking, and they don't care a fig about democracy. They care about staying in power and transforming our society into some mythic vision of Donna Reed, something from the 1950s. But what is the Democratic Party? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet, except that it's collectively opposed to what we see coming from a more clear right. And I think I've thought a lot about the last election, since the last election, and the idea that a felon, a sex offender, a liar, won over the Democratic Party says that opposition is not in itself enough, that we have to prove that we are tough enough and have new enough ideas to move the country forward that will gather people. And I don't know if we're capable of that, because the group that needs to be gathered isn't just our loyal base. It's also refugees from the old Republican Party, or young people who hate all political parties and are not interested, in them, or, people who, if they could, would start a third party. How do we, where is I think there's a majority to be. You look at all the polling, there's a majority in America. It just doesn't sit, there's no political apparatus to cobble it together.
Yeah, I think, it's frustrating because I'm both mad at the Democrats, and also I understand some of their problems. Like, as you said, the Democratic coalition is basically everyone who's not a fascist or comfortable with fascism right now. And that's like a pretty diverse group of people. And it's such a chilling reminder that the fundamental problem of our democracy right now in a lot of ways is that we do have a two-party system. And I'm not trying to frustrate people, because our Constitution is written in such a way that it's very difficult to get out of a two-party system and have a multi-party coalitional system like you have in a lot of European nations. But I do think that would solve a lot of our problems, because, one reason Democrats are struggling to identify themselves is that, there's really kind of two or three separate parties within the Democratic coalition. You have, a lot of people I would consider fiscally moderate people. There's fiscally moderate, socially liberal. Then there's a huge chunk that is both socially liberal and economically very progressive. And then you have a smaller group of people that is probably more socially progressive, but, socially or economically progressive, but socially conservative. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to kind of cobble together an identity and hold that coalition together when, they just disagree sometimes on pretty fundamental issues.
And so much, I'm not sure I want to go there. I think what you've described is that the labels that we use as shortcuts, and that the press uses and the politicians use, I'm a progressive, you're a conservative, that those labels themselves are broken, that they're meaningless, because if you dig down, the things that are supposed to be in those baskets aren't. You can be foreign policy hawk and socially liberal. You can be, as you say, fully born again, religious, true believer, and care passionately about the environment. Right?
Yeah.
We don't fit in the buckets that people use anymore, and using them has kept a political party from creating a majority.
That's a really, really good point. I think that there's no such thing as like a political party that's going to address everyone's esoteric, like, political beliefs. But I think the buckets I identified, would get like, would be general enough that most people would feel a little happier picking a party. But, in a lot of ways, it's like kind of moot because it's not going to happen unless we have like a really big shift, like we rewrite our Constitution. And I don't think anyone wants to do that right now because then it would just become more fascist.
Right. But there are different experiments with voting that move that way a little bit. I mean, ranked choice is one of the examples. Cumulative voting is another one that gives people different kinds of options, even in the system we have.
Yeah, but like shifting to the current problem right now, I think that especially with the disaffected, like swing voters and younger voters especially, the biggest problem with the Democrats is that they seem inauthentic. I think that they're so poll tested and focus grouped, and every message has to like be individually tested, and they never really have a narrative because it's just a bunch of like disparate poll tested slogans, and no one ever seems like they're speaking from the heart except like maybe an AOC or Bernie Sanders, and look how popular they are. They're even winning over people that would consider themselves more conservative, or moderate or whatever word you want to use for that in the party, because they're like, well, at least they stand for something. And
yeah, I had this experience in a different part of my life. I was a consultant, and I was working in another part of the world. And I wasn't very good at this in some ways. And I brought with me a younger person who had been in consulting longer. He never made a mistake. He studied, he was thoughtful, he was smart, he studied the culture of this country we were in, and he never made a mistake. And I made mistakes all the time. Mm-hmm. And I learned from them. And week in, he said, how come everybody trusts you despite you're saying things that, like are anathema in this culture, and they don't trust me? And I said, because, I am who I am, and it was easier. You are too, but it's harder to see that. It was like they just saw who I was. They knew that I was trying. They knew that if they told me I'd done something that was not appropriate, I would fix it, wouldn't do it again. And they liked that. That gave them a sense of who I was. And I agree with you that lesson is true in politics, and it's true in life. You have to be your genuine self if anybody's going to trust you.
Yeah, and I'm really, really worried about the next few years because this Biden age situation and the cover-up of it is going to continue to haunt the party because it's such you can yell at journalists until you're blue in the face. It's not going to change anything, but because it's going to just be like catnip to journalists to ask Democratic politicians, especially those who want to run for president, like about the cover-up of Biden's age-related decline. And if people can't just answer the question in an honest way, they're going to continue to look like they're going to end up reinforcing these already negative stereotypes that Democrats are just a bunch of like consultant creatures that never ever speak from the heart or never ever tell you the truth. And it's a real concern, and I really hope that people begin to realize, like, even if it offends Joe Biden and his family, you're just going to have to like look straight to camera and say, he hid it from all of us. It was wrong,
Right. He should. Right. I love Joe Biden. I thought he did some great things as president, except, was not able to be, and for reasons we now know, was not able to rise to the challenge of that the MAGA autocrats posed. And he wasn't able to because he was not able. He was too old. And that That's a tragedy, and he shouldn't have run again, and we should have had a primary. And God, Amanda, if we'd had one, that's what people would have paid attention to, as opposed to giving Donald Trump all this attention all that time, with nobody else to take the oxygen away.
I think that's true. And honestly, what you just said there is exactly the kind of answer that I think would make these questions go away well before the 2028 cycle begins.
Well, I think people are going to be practicing all these answers in public for starting this week.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But stop worrying about Joe Biden's feelings, folks, please.
Plus, I mean, Joe isn't just. I mean, I love him. He isn't just older. He's also old news. That's not where we have to go. We have to be forward-looking and talk about, okay. Joe was old back then. He's even older now. That's not where we need to go. We got to like Americans need to know that our government is fighting to make their lives better, and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and I think Build Back Better seemed like a good idea at the time. I now began to think it's, first of all, it sounded too much like MAGA, Make America Great Again, like a weaker version of that kind of slogan. And second of all, it was also kind of backwards looking. It was like, well, we're just going to regain what we lost. And it's like,
Yep.
I think you're right. Especially for younger voters, they want to hear, what are you going to do for my generation? And not to just keep harping on the age thing, but when all we're running is elderly people.
Well, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think there are going to be a lot of younger people running.
I think so.
And for things like governors and all over the country, I think we're going to see.
I'm excited about Pete Buttigieg for sure. I think he's really grown.
And he's very talented out there. Yep. Totally agree. All right, Amanda, I have something else that I think we have to do when we win. And I'm just going to run this idea by you. And those of you who are listening, forgive me for mentioning it yet again. Around the world, when there have been fascist moments and we've gotten past them, they take the symbols of fascist power and reclaim them. So I'm thinking of, if you've ever been to Berlin, what they do with the symbols that were Nazi symbols, whether it's Wannsee or, where the Chancery was. They turn them into museums. They turn them into places of conscience. Robben Island in South Africa, again, a place that now lets that nation have reconciliation, honestly, because it's been transformed. And after the Civil War, we did the same thing with Robert E. Lee's so-called plantation, otherwise known as slave camp, right? We said, you don't get it back. We are going to dedicate it as the burial site for those people we honor for beating you on the battlefield. I think we need to do that again. I think we need to repudiate this moment we're in when we win. And the best way to do it is to turn Mar-a-Lago into a Smithsonian museum on American fascism. I'm dead serious.
I appreciate that, but have you been there?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I've been outside once, but
it's kind of hard to get to.
Well, that's all right. I mean, the exhibit of the stacked boxes in the bathrooms will be kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, and the best part is it's both a museum and one no one visits, because you have to fly into the nearby airport and then drive an hour and then cross that bridge and drive down that narrow strip. It's a miserable trip. I don't know why anyone lives in Palm Beach. I hate it.
Well, that's part of the reason to take it from them, to just say, you only live here if you get your private jet to get here.
Oh no, take the private jet and make that he keeps talking about how Air Force One is in the Reagan Museum. That would be kind of fun too, is take that Qatari jet from him and turn it into a place where kids wipe their grimy fingers on everything. Yeah,
absolutely. Melt down the faux gold in the Oval Office and give it to charity.
I like it. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And it's funny because it's yes, in Berlin, they're able at least to imbue these kind of places with some solemnity, so a solemn air.
Yeah.
But like nothing about Trump. He's just garish and gross. So that'll be an interesting and fun project for like the kind of people that would, the curators and the artists that would design such projects to like make it camp.
Yeah.
You know.
And make it count. I think there's a story to be told there.
It's already happened.
So we have some elections coming up in Virginia and other places. I am optimistic. Are you?
Yeah, especially off-year elections. And I think that there's a lot more Democratic energy out there than people realize. It's just that it's not attaching itself to national party figures because they're all failing people. But, like, people are hungry right now. I don't know if you've heard Amanda Littman, who founded Run for Something. She said she's gotten more applicants from people that want to run for office for the first time this year than even any time after Trump was first elected. Like, it's just been this deluge. And like a lot of them are those fired federal employees, so they have a story to tell. I mean, I think that there's going to be some exciting stuff coming up, especially with people running for the first time for office. And yep. I think it's going to knock the national press sideways because all they're hearing, especially if they're either in New York or DC and they're not out in the kind of the field a little bit more, all they're hearing is like everyone hates Chuck Schumer, which is true. But like, I think that people are going to be surprised that there's actually some momentum on the ground.
I mean, and it's going to be momentum. I think Democrats really are going to run almost everywhere this time. They're not going to let seats go uncontested. Even if they lose, they're going to be asking people for their votes for the first time in all kinds of places. I note that in Texas, in the reddest county in Texas, the MAGA candidates lost every school board race.
Yeah, the school boards are, I've done some reporting here in Pennsylvania on school board races, and I was in Bucks County, which is a swing county. But yeah, Moms for Liberty took over their school board, and the parents there organized and booted them all out. Like, it was great. I think that here's it would be political malpractice, especially for the Democrats, not to stand up candidates in some of these places. A lot of the federal job losses were in very red areas, right? Yeah. Like, because a lot of these very red districts depend heavily on federal dollars or federal agencies. They have farming agencies. They have national park agencies. They have the Bureau of Land Management in the West owns and controls huge amounts of land. And a lot of people are employed in, or like find their employment through federal government in very red parts of the country. Like the press focused, because again, that was the easiest story for them to tell, on the people in Washington, D.C. But there are people everywhere who got hammered by these layoffs, and it would be smart to stand up Democratic candidates in those areas and see if you can get them.
I was laid off from my job at the National Weather Service, and no one was available to warn you about the tornado. And that's why 30 people died.
Yeah, the FAA people.
These are powerful messages.
Yeah, like the park rangers. There was a really great story about a town in Montana where they have research facilities and that are federally funded, and they fired like all these people who are researchers, and the rest of the town is panicking because these scientists and researchers are their money. Like they move from all over the country. They're college educated. They're usually like with doctorates and stuff. Yeah. They make a decent salary, and their existence pumps all this money into the local economy, which doesn't have a lot of other things going on for it.
Rural hospitals, rural schools, they'll close.
Yes.
Not just because of federal decisions, but because of state decisions that the same crowd is making.
But it will be I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to run on, a lot to bring people together on that isn't quite the same thing as saying you have to vote for us to save the democracy, which I think is true, but is also a little abstract. What we don't do a very good job of, Amanda, is explaining, because we don't teach civics, I guess, why democracies lead to better outcomes. So people don't really understand that when the place is gerrymandered, the politicians aren't working for the people, they're working for the guys who drew the maps. Or after Citizens United, they're not really working for the people who voted for them, they're working for the dark money that's flowing into every place. And these things lead to worse outcomes in their lives. We don't really tell that story very well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the Republicans have been telling a false but compelling story that fascism is more efficient, right? Because the boss can come in and make the decisions and he's not hamstrung by bureaucracy, right? And that has a certain appeal to it, like, especially if you've ever been tangled in a bureaucracy that is like slowing you down. And we do have a problem in this country with bureaucratic red tape getting out of control. So I think that makes a lot of sense to people. But that doesn't mean that fascism is good, because fascism has another more serious problem, which is that when the leader has all the power and he surrounds himself with flatterers and yes men, there's no way to stop him from making really bad decisions, especially when he's a full-blown moron like Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, and you get corruption. Corruption is its own kind of way of slowing things down. I mean, if it were efficient, Russia would have won the war in Ukraine in 10 minutes. It actually doesn't work that well.
It doesn't work very well. Zach Beauchamp at Vox has been writing a lot of stuff on this, and I really hope that people go read it, because it's so important to understand that robust democracies are economically superior, even though sometimes you do have bureaucratic rot, which has less to do with the people and more the sort of continuing piling on of red tape. You do need to clean that up sometimes. Yeah. But because the people themselves are making decisions, like the government is run by people who are actually put there by people by the people, and therefore they have the people's best interests at heart. And someone like Donald Trump only cares about Donald Trump, and so he's going to screw the rest of us in the process.
I don't think you need to say that in the future tense. It's already.
Yeah. True.
Speaking of future, I've just looked at the clock and we've run over time. Amanda, No. On the contrary, I'm very happy with these conversations. You're really a treasure. Tell people again how they find your newsletter and your new YouTube channel podcast.
Yeah, so my newsletter is called Standing Room Only, and it's at salon.com/newsletter. And my new show is also called Standing Room Only, and you go to YouTube, search for Salon TV, one word, and you can see my goofy face. My face isn't goofy, but you have to make goofy faces for the YouTube algorithm, so you will see my face in one of those videos, being like, what? And it's easy to click and easy to watch, and subscribe, and then you will get every episode.
Thank you, Amanda. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, we're taking a break, and then I'll hear from you when we come back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, Jim, kick us off.
Yeah, hi, Edwin. The best story I've heard this weekend is 20 Mule Team Patel is chasing down Jimmy the Beachcomber Comey in an assassination plot. It should be like a shootout at the OK Corral. That should be interesting. And then here's what gets me. As immigration is driving younger generation is in the hands of dictators all over the world. I mean, there's no question about it. But the point is, we've got climate change is going to really drive us to the ceiling, and there's nothing we can do about that. But it reminds me of 50 years ago. I remember Hesburgh from Notre Dame, Father Hesburgh from Notre Dame. They asked me, I said, what do you think about immigration? He said, well, think of it this way. Think of 5 astronauts in a capsule, and 3 of them have all the air and food supply. How long would it take the other 2 astronauts to cut their throats to get it? I mean, the Homo sapiens somewhere along the line has to learn how to share their bounty with the world. And real quick, as far as the Democrats, I have no. I mean, remember this: 2020. Didn't we have 81 million people vote for Biden? Didn't we get the House and Senate back? Did the Democrats mention anything about cutting red tape or any other nonsense? I didn't hear any of that when I voted for Biden. So I think we'll bounce back. I think they were to bounce back. This guy is an abomination to the United States of America, and everybody knows it.
I agree with you, Jim. I think we win. I do. But I also think we need a very energetic and very forward-looking agenda when we do. Because we can remember Biden won, but this clown won again. We didn't kill the disease.
Unfortunately, I know that. But you know it, and I know. You're an old-time Democrat, so am I. And we will reach back and find solutions to people's problems, because that's why I vote Democratic. And that's why I'll continue to vote Democratic. And you have a great weekend. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Jim. You bet. All right, let's go to Brian.
Hello, Edwin. Hope you're doing well, and excellent show as usual. I just I wanted to get your view. Do you think whatever Trump's calling his bill, do you think that's going to pass?
Are you talking about which bill? Are you talking about their budget bill?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm actually worried about the hitting our credit limit and our debt limit and not being able to pay our debts. I have no confidence in this Congress. None. Zero. Now, they may get something done, or they may get something done we hate, but I have no confidence in them. They certainly haven't earned any.
Well, I was thinking about how many people get kicked off Medicaid if it passes, and that would be a terrible thing.
Terrible
for Americans to lose their health care, which what health care we have. The Medicaid. Be terrible. Cruel and terrible. Cruel and terrible. And I mean, cruel and terrible. And for what? Because we can't afford it, or because we want to give the richest people in the world a little bit more? The latter. That's what it is.
Yeah, awful. Yeah. Awful. Thank you, Brian.
So you don't have an idea whether or not it'll pass right now.
No, but I don't even know what it is yet, because they haven't even agreed amongst themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to get your views on it, Edwin, and thank you very much for taking my call.
Of course. All righty, let's go to the West Coast and Paul.
Well, Edwin, the most enjoyable part of the conversation this afternoon was the 5 or so minutes about music, and I certainly understand we share a lot in that regard. My dad was a professional jazz trombone player and played with many of the great. He said the only one that he never got to play with was Sinatra. Played with many others, including Doc Severinsen. And I actually met Doc Severinsen about 10 years ago and told him a funny story. And Doc was, I won't go into the story, but Doc was looking at me like, what is this kid talking about? And it went back to 1958. And then as he realized that what I was saying had to have been true, a big smile came on his face. We got pictures of my friends were taking pictures of it. His confused look, and then the big smile that said, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
Oh, that's fun.
And I said, "You don't really remember that, Doc?" He said, "Yeah, that's the last thing I remembered before I started drinking too much." Doc will be 98 on July 7th. My dad passed away in 2021 of COVID. But my dad introduced me to George Shearing and Art Tatum when I was first starting to play the piano, because he wanted me to understand that just because you're going blind doesn't mean you can't be a great pianist. I've seen Oscar Peterson.
You took a different lesson than I did from that. The lesson I took from hearing Art Tatum as a young man was, kid, no matter how hard you practice, you are never going to be good enough.
Well, don't feel bad. Edwin, because Oscar Peterson, who I've seen him too. I saw him play with Joe Pass in Michigan. Oscar Peterson said that Art Tatum was the greatest jazz pianist ever, and that he couldn't touch him. So if Oscar Peterson is humbled by him, then don't feel too bad. You know, it's kind of like saying, "Oh, I'll never be Mozart," right?
And it wasn't just jazz musicians. There's a story that every time Art Tatum got to play at Carnegie Hall, which he did a few times, up in the box that overlooks the keyboard was Vladimir Horowitz, a great classical pianist, looking down to try and figure out what he's doing with his left hand.
Yeah. Oh, his left hand is just, I mean, it's totally independent of, he's like, how can he do this and do the right hand and not see any of it? It's just, but anyway.
So for those of you who do not know what Paul and I are talking about, because it's like not what we usually talk about on this show, go online and look up Art Tatum and just listen to a little bit of his piano music. You can't really go wrong. It's all of it is amazing.
Yeah, the Tiger Rag, I think, people would really appreciate the Tiger Rag. That's just, yeah, you're right. There's not a bad note. I mean, and he's blind. He was born blind, and George Shearing as well. So so my dad wanted me to. That was my dad's way of encouraging me that you might go blind, which I have, but it doesn't mean you can't be a great pianist. So anyway, speaking of things that are not so great, it's just I get so sick of what we understand is that the MAGA movement is, you remember how they used to decry big liberal government? It's only because they wanted big conservative government, right? Big conservative. It's
not even conservative. They just want power. They're not conservative.
Right, exactly.
Actually, Paul, let's play this game. Let's play this game. I'm going to read you part of the Declaration of Independence, and you tell me it's Trump-era parallel. Ready? Because the Declaration of Independence says the reasons why we left the king. So here's one. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing the judiciary powers.
How does that apply? Ever since he took office on January 20th, he's obstructed justice. I mean, he's defied court orders. He has violated just about every constitutional due process. Everything. That's. I don't know if
he has sent He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people.
Yeah. I love this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this game. I'm going to go do that because I hadn't thought of that, and I'm teaching.
Oh, really? How about this? For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world.
Right. That's right. and then taxing us, right, without representation, which is exactly.
Oh, well, that's the next one. Yes, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Yeah.
Exactly.
He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us.
Do all 15 of these line up?
Not every single one lines up perfectly, but a lot of them do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
amazing.
I think how about he's incited the savages against us, which I would consider to be his MAGA, his Proud Boys and they're savages and they attacked the Capitol and so at any rate, it's the same way that this is the kind of Christianity that they practice. I was going to say that my two nieces are both married to men from Central America. One from El Salvador, the other one from Nicaragua. And the younger one from Nicaragua just got his citizenship on March 19th. We were there. We went to Kansas City to be there for the ceremony, which I could not have been more proud, Edwin, to see in that room where a federal district court judge for the District of Canada convened federal court in this auditorium, and 352 immigrants from 71 countries got their citizenship and spoke that oath, and it was like being at 352 weddings all at the same time. People dressed to the nines. I've never seen. I felt like a bum because I was wearing jeans and a hoodie, and I thought I didn't know it was going to be this. Anyway, it inspired me because the one from Nicaragua, he got a citizenship on the 19th, but the day before, on the 18th, he learned that his visa had been revoked. So the citizenship, not a moment too soon, but I told him his name is, we pronounce it Esau, E-S-A-U, but he's pronounced it S-A-U. I said, you better get that straightened out because they are Christian missionaries, and they leave the country to do great work all the time. And I said, I don't think you should leave the country until you get this straightened out and get this visa revoked off your record, because citizen or not, they're not going to let you back in. And
well, we'll see, right?
They went to Nicaragua, or as the INS officer pronounced it, Nicaragua. I went, you got to be kidding me. All of those from Nicaragua, please stand. I was like, I hope you recognize this country. It's like, does this guy not know? I just thought it was embarrassing. He got Paraguay and Uruguay right, but Nicaragua, no.
Yeah.
They're the loveliest men. They're such gentle, sweet men. Both of them are, and I see why my nieces married them, because they're wonderful men. But this idea that the dominance in terms of they want a power government is the same kind of religious order they want to shove down everybody's throat. Is that they just want they don't really practice Christianity. What they practice is they want religious dominance too. So that's the same thing. It's kind of like how the Puritans and the Quakers, they really didn't get along. The Puritans were just lovely bastards to the Quakers, and yet that's kind of the way they are. The MAGAs are. They all they want is religious dominance. They don't really want to have anything peaceable of the Lord. If you know what I mean.
All righty. Well, that's interesting. They definitely want dominance. Hey, Paul, I'm going to run. We're running out of time, and I got two more callers I want to get in. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We're going to go to Eduardo, and then Eduardo, let's be quick, and let's save some time for Al, and that'll be it. Let's go,
okay,
Eduardo.
Edwin, yeah. So there's a story about Chinese having kill switches for these solar panels, and they found them in the power inverters. So they're able to use radios to switch them off. They suspect the outage in Spain and France, remember, some weeks ago? They're linking that to that. So this is something that Congress is going to have to take a look at, because it's going to happen more often.
Well, with globalization comes external risk for sure. I don't know this story that you're talking. I don't know the story about the kill switches. I haven't seen that. And with all stories like that, it's very important to double, triple check the sources, because this stuff is always hard to know. But yeah, I mean, we definitely have seen now. It took almost a year for Poland to do the forensics and say to the world it was Russia that burned down their shopping malls. So when we find it, we have to push back very hard. I don't think it's going to discourage China, or it's going to get them to behave better just to say we're never going to trade with you again. We're going to have to find a stable relationship with that giant country, not one that is so erratic. But I agree. These are real problems. And stealing our IP, which they've done for years, is a real problem.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Eduardo. I'm going to look that up. Good story. All right. You too. Al, you're going to close us off.
Cool. Hi, Edwin. It's been a while. I was going to agree with you on Mar-a-Lago. That would be helpful. And there's somebody down there right now, at least I saw a picture on Facebook with a plane and a banner that says Qatar logo. But I haven't vetted that, but I saw the picture. I'll have to look at that a little
Well, even
more.
if it's a fake picture, it's funny.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We're so much better than they are, and we're so much bigger than they, or no, not they. I'll say the Christian nationalists, the fascists, and the oligarchs. We're better than they are, and somehow we just have to be better at getting our message out. And we're bigger than they are. There are more of us than there are of them, and we got to somehow come together in our media and get our message out. And I want to crack their code. Who are all these people that are agreeing with them? You mentioned the fact that I had forgotten about that they were training people ahead of time, but they're only training a few people, who are these people, and also who are all the technical people, all the people that make this huge media monster work? They can't all be part of their ideologies. They got to be in there because they're out there to make money. Can't we get a few of them on our side? Because we got to be fast at this. We got to, they're using AI. They're figuring this stuff out. We have to do the same. And okay.
I am confident that we will, and I'm confident that out of the chaos that is the opposition right now, and I mean this as a feature, not a flaw. This confusion, that's what we feel, is the birth of something new and wonderful, as it was before Abe Lincoln figured out what to do with the chaotic opposition to the slaveholding power in the South. It didn't appear overnight. It wasn't one of the Whigs who stood up and said, "This is this is how we're moving forward." It took a while. But when we got it, America, we really got it, and we had a new birth of freedom. And that's what I think is going to happen, but it is painful to be in that time, and I have to work as hard as I can to help make that happen, as everybody does.
And a lot of people are. I mean, there are daily meetings right now in Indivisible talking about what is going on with very much smart people paying attention to the Supreme Court, paying attention to psychology. There's the Northwest Suburban Individual Group has a morning meeting at 9 o'clock. They have meetings at night for talking about the budget, talking about psychology, and that's just one of them. And so and I've been to Indivisible meetings, and there's a lot of them out there going on, and even Indivisible's got to get better so we can get down to the neighborhood. I still don't know anybody in my neighborhood that's progressive like I am.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know them in my neighborhood, but the reason I know them is because I have a dog, and I go walk my dog, and I talk to everybody I see, and it's a fabulous.
Do that better.
All right, thank you for your call, Al. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your being part of this community and your being part of this fight. And to everybody who listened today, I apologize for rambling a little bit earlier when I guessed and I got crosswise about the time, but I appreciate your patience, and we'll do it again next week. You have a great week.